Well, we have just the last participant is still not yet in, but I would not want to make the to take too much time. So let me see if I yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, uh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We are having a new webinar. I am Paulo Casaca. I am the director of South Asia Democratic Forum. And we decided to organize this webinar at last as a last minute event, since we consider that the situation, the international situation, and mainly the confrontation between the Indian and the Chinese armed forces at the border in Ladakh, a very important geopolitical event, of course, for South Asia, but also for the whole of the world and for Europe in particular, and that we should not let this occasion without having a global reflection of what is going on. In fact, since the outbreak of the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, uh, there has been
A little bit for the moderator, but
yes. So we had an informatic accident. Hopefully, it was just an accident, but I suddenly lost Wi-Fi. I just had to put my hotspot of my mobile working. So I'm sorry for this interruption to all of you. So we shall restart right now. So we were exactly speaking about, going to speak about this, well, the cyber attacks that were made during the height of the pandemic crisis in Europe to health infrastructure by Chinese agents. And this has been bluntly said by the president of the European Commission in a video conference directly with President Xi this last Monday. And this was, of course, not the first time the European authorities had been making the claim. This claim had been made before by Josep Borrell, who is the representative of the European diplomacy, as well as by the Commissioner Vera Jourova, who is responsible for these internet issues. But this was done face to face and publicized in the official website of the European Commission, which is really, a different position from what Europe had accustomed up to now. But the fact is that we have seen China that at the same time that tries to sell the image of a very cooperating country with the international community that helps everyone, sends supplies to everyone to fight the pandemics, but at the same time it is having not only a diplomatic wolf warrior action, but this sort of disinformation campaigns, cyber attack, and in the case of the South China Sea military presence, there was indeed clashes with with Vietnamese fishing boats. There are very aggressive signs regarding Taiwan, and now we had a confrontation in Ladakh. And this is a very serious event. I think that since 62, nothing like that had been seen. And for this, we have decided to invite different perspectives and different positions. We would start by one of the most important observers of the Indian political reality, Professor Harsh Pant. Professor Harsh Pant is a professor of international relations at King's College London and in the Department of Defense Studies. He has been very much engaged in the analysis of the international scene of South Asia. He is engaged in think tanks in India. He also give us the privilege of being advising us, SADF, and is going to present his point of view on an Indian point of view on this confrontation. We will have then Dr. Siegfried Wolf. He is our Director of Research in SADF. He has been analyzing this issue of the Indian-China confrontation in a very in-depth way. He just published a lengthy report, a research report that is in our website on the issue, and he's going to give his perspective. We will have then Mr. Mehran Baloch, who is Baloch representative in the United Nations Human Rights Council and in the European Union. And finally, we will have the member of the European Parliament, Honorable Fulvio Martuscello. He is an Italian from the European People's Party member. He has been quite engaged in the international scene as well, and he will give a European perspective. Our idea is to start with short speeches that would not go over 10 minutes, and then to have a discussion. Everybody is invited from this moment onwards to raise questions using our Q&A device that is available in our Zoom mechanism. So this is it. Without further delay, I would give the floor to Professor Harsh Pant. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paulo, for having me here today, and thank you to SADF for organizing this this conversation. It is certainly very important, obviously from India's point of view, from China's point of view, but I think the fact that that you sitting in Europe are taking an interest and that this discussion is being is having in the European landscape is equally important, because I think there are some fundamental questions about the emerging global order that are also encompassed in this, what is happening in South Asia. And I hope that European Union that increasingly wants to emerge as a geopolitical actor will have something more substantive to say about this than what we have heard so far. So I hope this conversation, conversations like these happen more often, and the engagement between various constituencies in Brussels and elsewhere becomes more substantive. So I mean, as you have said, I'll be very brief. Basically, looking at very briefly what has happened and how India assesses it, and what has been the Indian response so far, and drawing out long-term assessments about not simply Indian foreign policy, but also about the larger Asian geopolitics as it is evolving. So this crisis, as many of you would know here, started in early May, where we, since early May, we started talking about these multiple points in the LAC, line of actual control, which is the undemarcated boundary between India and China, where there were tensions on multiple fronts. And Eastern Ladakh and Ladakh became the focal point this time, which is quite interesting because in the past, Ladakh has not been that important a factor, or not that important, a strategic portion of this LAC. But this time, it has been Ladakh that is at the center of these engagements. And what is also interesting is that Chinese military encroachment in areas which were never in contention in the past. For example, the Galwan Valley, which is in the news, has never been part of the Chinese assertion in the past. And suddenly now we find that there is a new point, that there is a new area that is widely being contested. And as is the norm, traditionally local, and as per the protocol, as per the standard operating procedures in the region, this is an undemarcated boundary. Transgressions often happen from both sides, and usually local level military commanders resolve this at their own level. So the local military commanders would sit and they would decide to disengage and to lower the temperature as per the several agreements that India and China have. But this time, these initial transgressions could not be resolved at the local level. So senior level military officials had to intervene. And what we were looking at was that those engagements seemingly seemed to be going in the right direction. So everyone was expecting that, that the senior level military official level engagement was successful and gradually withdrawal would happen. And everyone was expecting that, as is the norm, these things will disappear. But suddenly on the night of July 15th, we saw something very unprecedented, frankly, in this part of the LAC, in this part of the Sino-Indian border, where violence erupted, where casualties happened, where in the Galwan Valley in eastern Ladakh, we had the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers and unconfirmed number of soldiers from the Chinese side. So now this is clearly unprecedented, because something that Chinese and Indian sides have been very proud of in the past is that this is a border, this is a boundary through which no shots have been fired. This is something you often hear. Yes, this is undemarcated. Yes, transgressions happen, but shots have never been fired. Violence had not taken place in a long time. Casualties had not happened. So clearly, the fact that in one single night 20 Indian soldiers died, and of course Chinese soldiers also died. As per some reports emerging, China has not confirmed them, but there is enough evidence to suggest that casualties happened on both sides. So clearly, I think for India, the fact that a border that was seemingly stable could erupt on such a short notice, at a time where the outer perception was that disengagement is about to happen, has challenged many of India's old assumptions. It has shaken the very foundations of Sino-Indian relationship. This is a relationship that was premised on one major assumption, that India and China can continue to talk about boundary, they can continue to engage on this issue of border, but that is separate from the larger relationship. The larger relationship on trade, on commerce, on culture, on other activities can continue, and the border negotiations can continue separately. That the border issue, it is very important, but it should not overshadow the bilateral engagement that had been the accepted norm in this relationship for the last several decades, and that assumption is today broken. That assumption has been shaken. That assumption is dead. So clearly what has happened is that from India's perspective, China has now, with this, what is happening, even today, what is happening at the boundary, at the LAC, has violated every single tenet of every single treaty it has signed with India, at least since 1993. Because it started in the early 1990s, this process started where the two sides decided that they would try to maintain peace and tranquility on the border and allow that to give space to the larger Sino-Indian relationship. Because if this becomes the dominant narrative, then the larger relationship could not move forward. And this is exactly what seems to have happened today. That narrative, the Sino-Indian border problem is now front and center. It is at the core of Sino-Indian relations, and it is overshadowing today the wider trajectory of India-China relationship. So it is an inflection point. There is anger on the streets. There is genuine anger against China, and there is a new political resolve in the political and policy-making community that the past should not now shape the future, that we need new mechanisms, we need new set of parameters for engaging China. Older parameters no longer can be maintained, and they can no longer hold true in this environment. Very briefly, two important points. One can assess this at many levels. One can assess this at the strategic level. I think Paolo was mentioning earlier that if you look at China in the last few months, China is doing a lot, but China is also militarily aggressive on a number of fronts, from Hong Kong, Taiwan, South China Sea, to Australia, to Europe. Everywhere there are concerns growing about Chinese behavior, and that in effect is also part and parcel of the larger dynamic about the Chinese Communist Party, about Xi Jinping's leadership within China, there is enough evidence to suggest that there is enough contestation within China itself. So this militant nationalism perhaps also helps China domestically. There is a strategic aspect to this. The other strategic aspect is, of course, India's rise and India's ability to stand up on various issues to China, be it India rising, India asserting itself, which is also the larger strategic reality that one can look at into when one examines Sino-Indian relationship. But at the tactical and operational level, which I think is very, very significant in this crisis, which one has to understand, and which is, I think, going to shape this line of actual control for a significant future. And there we have some very significant developments happening at the operational and tactical level, where India's activities at that level, not simply at the foreign policy and larger strategic level, but also at the operational and tactical level, are now frontally challenging China. So whether it is India's rapid buildup of infrastructure, which allows India to project power in the region, along the LOC, much more frontally, much more aggressively, whether India's patrolling, which is more effective because of it, whether India's sudden presence of Indian military soldiers in areas in which Chinese are frankly not used to seeing Indian military there. Suddenly they now find that Indian military is up there, and that challenges. Also the fact that a very critical road, which is the 255 kilometers all-weather road, which is called DSBO road, Darbuk Shayok Daulat Beg Oldi road, which is a very important strategic road for India that connects Ladakh to Karakoram Pass, is very significant. India has completed that, and it has been at the front and center of Chinese opposition. One thing that the Chinese have been insistent upon is that construction on this road in particular need to stop. And they have raised this objection consistently, despite the fact that the road is very, very clearly within the Indian side of the LAC. But Chinese believe that if this road and other tertiary aspects of this road become fructify, become operational, then they would pose challenge to Chinese interests going forward. And therefore, in some ways, this is also a preemptive move by China to dissuade India by doing a show of strength. So you have now a very, very realistic operational tactical realities that are also shaping Chinese behavior, that are also shaping what is happening in Ladakh, because Ladakh is again at the center of it. As I said, for a long time, Ladakh was not at the core of this dispute. So China's actions in this particular case have been very aggressive, and have resulted in the casualties, for the first time since 70s. So we are looking at a landscape that is very, very turbulent. And it is turbulent for two reasons. One, of course, is Chinese are aggressive. Chinese are aggressively pushing India. But it is also turbulent because India is not willing to let go. So it is aggressive because India is standing up, and India is saying that we will not stop the infrastructure construction. We will not stop military patrolling. We will prevent you from entering now territories which lie within the line of actual control. So standing up is something which has given this situation a dynamic that makes the whole border very, very volatile. And therefore, the basic argument that I can make is that unless there is now a permanent resolution to the boundary problem, the international community should expect more turbulence on the border. It should expect a border that will remain turbulent for the foreseeable future because there are no mechanisms available to resolve these disputes, both informal mechanisms of the past, like the ones that I mentioned, formal mechanisms of the past, like the ones I mentioned, a piece of treaty of peace and tranquility along the border, etc., and the special representative mechanisms, they have sort of have been found wanting, and the more informal mechanisms which Mr. Modi invented, the so-called Wuhan spirit, the Wuhan post-Doklam, the Wuhan engagement, that have also not produced the kind of results that India was hoping. So both formal and informal mechanisms have not worked, and now India would demand that there has to be a fundamental relook at the boundary question and a resolution to this problem, because in its absence, and India is making it clear, if you see India's diplomatic statements, if you see the statement of the External Affairs Minister, it is very categorical that this incident has changed the way India will behave with China, and this incident would force India to make a case to China that unless this boundary problem is resolved, other aspects of Indo-China engagement, India-China engagement would also remain at a very, very low level. So clearly we are looking at a foreign policy transformation as far as India is concerned, at a foreign policy landscape that is, that India will try to shift in its own favor. But most importantly, what this crisis has done is to make it easier for Indian policymakers to make choices, both economic and strategic, that will be explicitly anti-China in orientation. So if in the past, Indian policymakers were tentative about things like Quad, about how much to trade with China, in which sectors to allow China, I think those debates are now no longer going to happen the way they used to happen. There is a certain clarity that Indian policymakers now have, and this is more explicit. So I think what this crisis has done is to make the anti-Chinese orientation of Indian foreign policy more vivid and more explicit. And I think that in itself should worry not only China, but also the larger Asian geopolitics, which is already passing through a lot of turbulence. But if India-China cannot get their act together, then we are in for greater turbulence in the wider Indo-Pacific. So I would end there and give the floor to others. Thank you.
Professor Pant, thank you so much for your magnificent testimony. I think that you really managed to explain to mainly to our European audience how serious the events are, how we can classify this confrontation as really having seismic proportions and really changing completely the mindset of the main geopolitical players in the region. Thank you very much. You have already some questions for you, but of course we will continue our roundtable before getting to the questions. Now we will continue with Dr. Siegfried Wolf, who has been observing the issue in detail, coming from a European perspective, from our SADF perspective. Please, Dr. Siegfried Wolf, the floor is yours. Sorry, just a minute, because I think you still do not have the micro. Yeah, just a minute. Just a minute. Yes, Dr. Wolf. Yeah, you have. Okay, so there is a problem with the micro. Can you
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
I
Just
know
only
you can
now.
hear me
Only
now.
now.
Okay, good,
Okay.
fantastic.
Okay.
First of all, of course, it's, I want to say it's a fantastic, great honor to be with such an interesting mix of experts together. I mean, Hashpant, of course, you are one of the most well-known voices from India and here in Europe active. And Mehran, you're also well-known, of course, from Pakistan, who gives us insight. So I hope I have a presentation, but I don't know how much I would stick to the presentation. I think it would be extremely interesting when we would be able to combine different things. From my perspective, my problem is what I have when I look on this current issue. It's too localized. Yeah? And when I'm talking about too localized, it's not just the India-China issue. Yeah. When you need to understand, I wrote a report on that, and my point is, one of my points, we have to look at the whole picture, or we have to try to understand the Chinese action. Yeah. And when it comes to this, we have two things. The kind of violence we're observing now, I mean, we have a lot of violence. I mean, Hashpan can tell us many stories, I guess. How many border conflicts and fist fightings and all of these things we have in the past. But now we have complete different picture. I mean, the whole picture, the organized things, how Chinese are inventing and transgressing into Indian territory. This is completely new. I mean, perhaps I missed it, but I think it's for me new. I never experienced such aggression. We have such aggression perhaps in Southeast Asia, what the Chinese did. But regarding India, this is for me, my argument is completely new. And in this direction, I would even make the argument that this confrontation is even worse or more intense, let's say more intense than what we have in 1962. When it comes to the intensity, geographical territory, I mean, I'm not a military person, but I have a lot of contacts with military people, and the way how you have 3-4 intrusions on such a long distance, this is organized. It's not just what you had in the past, that unfortunately some Chinese people or Indian border patrols moved on the other side. So it smells, it is like there's something behind. So this is one thing which I would just keep in mind for our Q&A session later. The second point which I want to recall in our thing is we have to see the bigger picture. I mean, what's going on? We have Mehran here. He will tell us, I think, a lot of things that's going on. Perhaps he will. I mean, he was the expert on Quadra, Balochistan. Yeah, what's going on there? I mean, when you listen to the reports, we have reports on an upgrade of Quadra in security issues. I mean, at least it's. I mean, okay. When I would be external force in Pakistan, I would also build up security forces. But the thing how China's built up Quadra now, it's interesting. I mean, we have to observe that. One thing, we have reports on Maldives. Yeah, that China has interest there. Hashpant might know much more about what's going on Nepal, India. I'm not the expert in this. I will not intervene in this issue, but there's also some debate, at least, that there's some Chinese influence. With Sri Lanka, we have Bangladesh, and we have many, many, many other states in Southeast Asia. So we have to see, these are my 2 points. The first, the high level of aggression of Chinese people, which is completely new, and involving bigger picture. So in this, both 2 things we have to encounter, because normally China was never ever so aggressive like in this. They were aggressive, but not so much, so strong. So this is my point, my 2 points. And then, of course, the other things you have to keep it down. And perhaps Mehran might get now the bigger picture with Pakistan and CPEC, which is more my area of research. Yeah. And I think there is a tremendous link. I mean, I just wrote a report. For me, is, for example, a strong link between the current border issue and CPEC. The amount of troops creation in Gilgit-Baltistan, you can't. This is too much. You have to think about it, and I'm pretty sure that we can perhaps, with your insights, and then later in the Q&A, we could link the issue between the border conflict and Pakistan and CPEC, which you are also outstanding expert.
Very good.
When I would give, is allowed to give the word back to the moderator?
Very good. Very good, Dr. Siegfried Wolf. As he was saying, he is actually the author of a very comprehensive book on the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and he also authored a very important research on this relation, this conflict between China and India. The number of questions is growing, but without getting already into this debate, I would now pass the floor to our third participant. It is a very good friend of us for a very long time, Mehran Baluch. He is joining us, and he is going to give us his perspective on this conflict, and of course, anything else that he thinks it's appropriate at this moment. Please, the floor is yours. Let me see if you have the micro. Yeah, let me see micro. For some reason, your micro is not there. Can you put the micro on? Oh yeah, it's on. Good. Go ahead. We are not hearing you. Some problem with your sound. Did you test your sound? Because the micro should be there. Is there a sound with you? Try again. Still no sound. If there is no sound, I will just ask to Deshika if she can deal with it, can help you, and perhaps we would make a small twist in our program, and we would see if Honorable Fulvio Martuccello, if he is available right now. I'm not sure if he is available. Not yet. He's not available yet. Well, yeah, we are not hearing you. I don't know if you tried. Did you try the connecting? Try again. We are not hearing you. Connecting. There's a problem. Some connection. Yeah. No, we cannot hear you. Well, perhaps we would like. Could perhaps both of you try now? Yeah, we are having, yes. Honorable Martuccello is there. I think he is coming. So we are having a problem with Meran Baluch that we are going to try to sort out. Yes, Honorable Member of the European Parliament, Fulvio Martuccello. So can you get the sound? Yeah, there is no sound from you yet as well. There is no sound. We are having problems with the sound for some reason. Yeah, now we have the sound. Please, please. Yes, Fulvio, you are there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I was at lunch in the embassy of Kazakhstan, and the ambassador said to me, "Please hit the China, please." Everybody hates China. It's incredible. So the border confrontation between India and China that has been going for weeks now has recently resulted in killing of 20 Indian soldiers. The situation can be considered to be a turning point in bilateral ties between the two nations, with China making efforts to violate and occupy as much territory as it can take in the eastern part of Ladakh. But also the border standoff between the two nations can have serious impacts on the European Union. With the army of the two nations lining up against one another for weeks, the European Union is finding itself in a more figurative dilemma than ever before. Since Europe holds important ties with the world's biggest democracy, it is in strong ties with China as well, as the latter is engaged in One Belt, One Road initiative to embrace the European world. The ongoing confront between India and China have given an opportunity to EU to get rid of China's intents hidden in its Belt and Road initiative and its policy of debt trap, which can severely land the European Union into unsustainable levels. Several experts have also warned Europe of China's debt trap policy that could turn into Trojan horse with the former invasion in the heart of Europe. While the world today is fighting under the daily effects of a coronavirus pandemic, China is going against India's growth aspects and posing high time for Europe to emerge out as a union and meet its trade partner at similar levels, disguised with several challenges. China's neocolonialism plans and their ill effects are well seen in Baluchistan due to China-Pakistan economic corridor. We don't want the same for Europe. I hope the EU and its partners will understand how China is infiltrating Indian territory and take this act of aggression from China as an indicator to what is coming for Europe in the future from China. I can say that all members of the Parliament know that India stays in the right side and China is on the bad side. So I can say that all of my colleagues know what we have to do against China. We are preparing a dossier, we are preparing a resolution against China, and we are sure that this war against India at the border will not end well for China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Martuccello. This has been a very clear position from the European Parliament. We are very thankful for it. Yes, Kazakhstan is actually another place of tension. There has been more and more demonstrations of the lack of respect for the Kazakh independence from several quarters in China, and we cannot be surprised that the Kazakh authorities are not very happy with the way that some Chinese media has been treating the country. That's for sure. This is really a widespread policy from the Chinese authorities, as a matter of fact. Well, I hope that the problems are now sorted out with our fourth guest, Miran Baluch. So I'm giving him the floor. Hopefully, we will now be able to hear him. Please. No, still not. Still not. We really have a problem. Well, perhaps we will try to take care of it. But in the meantime, I would suggest perhaps that we could go on to the questions, and I would ask Deshika, that is assisting us at the control panel, that she would try to see with Miran if we can see what is going on. So we have several questions. Well, perhaps I would first give reference to a question coming from Lieutenant General Arun Kumar Sani, a retired general. He made, well, I think more a declaration than a question. And as the Indian Army has been really the main actor of behind this webinar, perhaps I would refer to him, and I would read most of his declaration. He is saying, "I want to clarify that China interests have to be viewed from its expansionist designs. Yaksai Chin was illegally occupied by China in 1954. Encroachment under its creep forward continued till the war in 1962. It has to be appreciated that the western highway of China connecting to its northern province of Xinjiang was made stealthily in 57. To note, Indian patrolling till 58 was well east of this road, which is 150 kilometers away from the site of the dastardly and unsoldierly unethical action of PLA China on the night of 15-16 June of this year. The gamble failed, for it's convinced that India's growing capability was faster than they realized, as also assertiveness of political leadership. Can always share my views at another event. This was more a declaration than a question. Thank you very much to General Arun Sani. So without further delay, I would go to the other questions. There are several. Well, trying to organize them. Perhaps I would start by a question raised by in the name of the administration of the Delhi Policy Group in Delhi. Professor Pant, do you think India's internal decision on Article 370 in August 2019 also played a part on China's assertions in Ladakh? That's a question directly to Professor Pant. You have another question coming from SADF, from Professor Dentinho. He would like to have your views on to what extent this conflict can be also related to the control of water. I mean, there was obviously an incident in the confrontation regarding the river going over there, but I suppose that Professor Dentinho speaks on the grand picture. And of course, he also raised the issue of Kashmir, if there is any relation of Kashmir conflict and this confrontation. This is in relation, I think, to the first question. There is a question here. I don't see who raised it. It's anonymous. So saying that there is the Indian nationalist policy a risk or an opportunity for India in this geopolitical game? I mean, I'm sorry, this is anonymous. So this can just be on the for the whole of the debate. So as most of the questions were for Professor Pant, perhaps I would give him the floor, and we would try again after to get to Maran Baluch. Yes, Professor Pant, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think certainly the India's decision to change the administrative status of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir last year has had a very significant impact on China. And the fact that China had been consistent in its opposition to the claim, to India's moves, even at one point taking the issue all the way to the Security Council, last year, underscores the danger that China feels comes out of that decision. Now, India has reiterated that that decision is basically for India's own internal administrative arrangement. It does not change India's international boundaries, but that is not something that China is considering at the moment. China considers at the moment. It continues to believe that will impact its ability to project both economic and military power if the Ladakh becomes the focal point of Indian attention, which I think is also once again a preemptive move aimed at making sure that the kind of arrangements, both economic, structural, strategic, the kind of investments that China has made and that Dr. Wolf was talking about around India's periphery, those come under contestation. They become more contested with India's Ladakh decision, with India's decision on Article 370. So I think it is very directly related to it. And my sense is that I don't, my personal sense is that this kind of behavior with further make sure that that India refuses to take anything China says at face value, and the challenge for China and India becomes even more acute. That decision, Article 370 decision, has had a major impact, and India's decision to ramp up activities in Ladakh post that decision is also is a function of that arrangement. Water was raised. I think the water issue was discussed. Water clearly, I mean, see, one can look at Sino-Indian problem in that part of the world, in the Himalayas, as a function of several things. It is a function of geostrategy. It's a function of geopolitics, geoeconomics. It is also a function of water resources and the contestation over water resources that has been going on for quite some time now. The issue, I think, is always how do you manage these differences? Whether there are mechanisms available for managing these differences that allow you to transcend the conflictual problem. My sense is that in this particular case, China realized that this is something that it needs to do now, because if it does not preempt India's moves today, then tomorrow the cost would be higher for China. And I think the kind of escalation that we have seen is something that is a tribute to that set of mentality. Unfortunately, I think what the Chinese have done, as I indicated in my initial remarks, is that it will further make India's resolve stronger, and it would further embolden India to do much more, and to create much more. We are already seeing that, for example, the ramping up of military across the LAC is much more significant. The construction of infrastructure has been expedited. So clearly, whatever China intended to do with this decision will have an equal and opposite effect on India. I think there was a question on economic corridor, etc. I think Dr. Wolf is much better placed to answer that than I am, given his recent research.
Thank you very much, Professor Pant, for your very sharp and clear answers. Let's try again, Miran. You are still without micro. Let me see if we can give you a micro. Well, I'm very sorry, but we cannot hear you. Perhaps if you can type a declaration, we can perhaps try to get you. I think that next time we will have to see these technical issues before we have to prepare before the meetings. I'm sorry, we cannot hear you. Well, on this issue of the economic corridor, so I don't know if Dr. Siegfried Wolf wants to come to it. No, we have no sound.
I think Siegfried needs to unmute himself. Siegfried?
Yeah.
Sir, I will put Mr. Baluch on via my microphone, and I hope we can communicate through that.
Okay, so Siegfried, could you just wait a minute, please? Okay. Yeah, so let's do it, please, Miran.
Can you hear me now, Paolo?
Yes, yes, I can. How are you? It's very good to hear you.
Very well, thanks. Hello to all the participants. My apologies. I think it's a Chinese cluster with my sound system here. With the recent flare-ups between India and China is a clear indication of Chinese imperialism taking out territorial markers to force India to submission and subservience. With Bangladesh and Sri Lanka already under its influence, and Pakistan occupied by Chinese state corporations, prison labor, as well as military, Beijing seeks to consolidate its hold of the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal, the Arabian Sea, and the port of Gwadar at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. China will leave a lasting impact on Europe if it's not kept in check. A nuclear armed naval submarine base on the shores of occupied Baluchistan puts the Persian Gulf oil flow to Europe in jeopardy. From Gwadar, the Chinese control the maritime waters of Western India, the Red Sea, and with a basis in Sri Lanka and Maldives. If India is subdued, Europe will be cut off from Australia and the Far East. The way to stop this is twofold. Help India stand up against China, and help the independence movement in Baluchistan to cut off the dragon's neck and secure the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf from the tentacles of the Chinese serpent. I hope you could understand anything I said, Father.
I think that I could understand you very, very well. I hope that this was the case of all our participants, and especially those who are speaking, our guest speakers. I think that you have a point on the way that China is trying to buy its way all around India. It's very obvious. Use its financial clout and its economic power to try to buy smaller countries against India. I think that all countries in South Asia, they should look at the issue strategically, and they should not look at it in a very narrow-minded way. And of course, you mentioned the very serious issue of Gwadar, the possibility of having nuclear submarines, Chinese nuclear submarines from Gwadar in the heart of the Arabian Sea is something that should, as you rightly said, make not only India, but all of the international community, and of course, Europe, very concerned with. This is something that cannot be seen as a domestic issue, but it is really a global problem. And Mehran, thank you so much for highlighting this issue. We were hearing you a bit like you would be in the outer space. We're not so far away. But anyway, I think that we could hear you, and that is the fundamental. Thank you so much for your participation. So let's see if we can now give sound to Dr. Siegfried Wolf. See that you are not blocking yourself. Dr. Siegfried Wolf. Yeah. And mute yourself, Dr. Siegfried Wolf. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes. Now it's possible. Please
okay.
go ahead. And don't move the camera, please.
So camera and tone is fine.
Please go ahead. We want to hear you on the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
Okay, I mean, we have we have several issues in that front. I mean, one thing which I already mentioned, which we don't know, and partly I can't talk all about it, but it seems that China is building up a second base, overseas base. So it looks like this. I mean, of course, when I would be in Pakistan and I would try to secure my people, then I would also in a place like Gwadar. Yeah, okay, I would also build up a base. So, but the incredible amount of investment which goes into the compounds, and they have those 3 compounds. I mean, no, not the technical one, but how people explain it to me, it's a first step to get further. So, and this you can understand what this means. The second thing is, which I always underline, we have a big problem with CPEC. Or China has a problem with CPEC. Pakistan, from their ideology, not. But China has a problem. They try at least to have a legal base for the Belt and Road. Yeah, and the legal base when it comes to Belt and Road is lost when it comes to CPEC, Gilgit-Baltistan. You have part in a disputed territory. So, and I'm not sure how this will develop. Mehran might be able to talk more about this, but I can imagine that this is an issue which is doesn't make Pakistani elites happy, and Indians also not. Nobody makes happy. But it will be for sure an issue. I don't know how it works. We have already indication for that China is starting to influence policy making in Pakistan. Just look on the latest decision on Netra. Yeah, there is obviously a Chinese influence on China's Pakistani political decision making. Yeah. So, and this is a point we have to take into account when we consider future Pakistani-China relation. But we have also to consider, and this is, we have the ambivalence in Pakistan-China relation. Yeah? The ambivalence is, on one side, we have this increasing Chinese influence, but on the other side, we have this jihadism. And they're getting increasingly unhappy with China. So, and this would be interesting now to observe how these two things get balanced by Pakistani decision makers. So this we have to see. And this is one thing we have to take into account.
Thank you very much for your analysis and perspective on the relations from China and Pakistan. I think that we are about to wind up our conference. I think that we are now coming to terms with a new reality. Some of us had already previewed that this situation might unfold the way that it is unfolding, but some of it did not. And we are now facing a very complex and dangerous world where we face a major power that is challenging the existing structures and wants to become the #1 power on any consideration, and wants to do it using no matter what means, and namely using a permanent duplicity in narrative. On the one hand, a constructive, an engaged, and on the other hand, a confrontational, an aggressive wolf warrior one. This is a situation that clearly will influence the future political developments in the world. I hope that the European declaration made by the President of the European Commission will have consequences, and that she will be faithful to her promise of being a geopolitical president of the commission, and that she will be able to understand the whole of the picture and not to look at things one by one. And this is going to be the big issue for the future. Well, if our interlocutors, our guests want to still to add something, perhaps Dr. Siegfried Wolf, you said you wanted to say something, please.
I have just one thing which I mentioned that before. I was writing this report on this China-India border conflict, and the most worried thing, because I have this international law background from my studies, what I'm worried is that we have an increasing tendency from Philippines to India now of China is not accepting international agreements. And this is a point where I think where the European Union should get active. Or
Absolutely.
think about it. Yeah, I'm not a politician. Yeah, I'm academic. Yeah, I'm a researcher. I mean, this is beyond my thing. But this
Absolutely.
we have to see. When you look on all the border agreements we have, starting from 1996 and whatever, we have a lot of border agreements between India and China. And the last one is complete break of everything. Doklan was also very close, yeah? So 2017. But I think, and this is a point we have to understand, that there is a tendency of not accepting agreements. So this
Exactly.
is my point, which I want to
Very
make.
good.
And that's we have to learn.
Thank you very much.
deal with this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wolf. So, Professor Ashpand, I don't know if you still want to add something. Oh, you are quite okay. Well, my apologies for all the participants and for our guests for the technical difficulties that we had during this presentation. My great thank you for your presence. It was, I think, it was really a landmark. We are very, very pleased to have such a high level, such a clear vision coming from India, like the one that was given by Professor Pant to a mostly European audience. We are very thankful for you to have done this. And we will keep an eye, a close look on the situation, and we will see other angles of the issue and how to deal with them. Thank you very much to all of you, and I am looking forward to seeing you in our next meeting. Goodbye, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.